Now we're going to talk about adding links to your HTML. And I'll explain about that in just a minute, but before I move forward, I want to make one final note regarding image elements and adding images to your HTML. We explored it pretty thoroughly in the last video, but one thing I want to make very clear to you guys is if you, say, go to W3 Schools and look up an image element or an image tag, it shows you something like this, and this is a perfectly fine image element. The only thing that might look different to you or stand out to you is the fact that they include this height and this width attribute in the image tag. This is not something we want you to do, okay? This is not something we want you to do. It's possible. It will work. This image will now be 42 pixels tall and 42 pixels wide, but we very, very much want to steer you against doing this. The reasons why will be explained in a little bit when we talk about CSS and all the different ways to add CSS to your page, but suffice to say that if you do things our way, which we really suggest, you will never be using a height attribute or a width attribute in your HTML like this. Okay? I hope that makes sense. I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, always feel free to ask. So, links. How to add links to our HTML. Now, when I say links, I don't mean, for example, this link tag, which actually links to our external style sheet. This link tag is something very, very different. This link tag is, in fact, a link to another file that powers our website, but I don't want you to think of it as a link. Okay? If I or your mentor or anyone you're speaking to says link tag or link element, they're referring to this. Link tag or link element. But in normal talk, normal vernacular, when somebody says a link, what they're actually referring to is a clickable hyperlink, like you might find on any other page. If I recreate that same W3 School search that I just did, each of these are clickable hyperlinks. Clickable hyperlinks. These are what we're going to talk about adding to our HTML. And it's actually quite simple. The element for creating a clickable hyperlink is called an anchor. And it's written with an A. Okay, its tag name is an A. That's an opening A tag and a closing A tag. An opening anchor tag and a closing anchor tag. Now the way anchors work is the text or image or content, whatever it is which you want a user to be able to click on, needs to go inside the tags, between the two tags. So for example, if I wanted to recreate this hyperlink right here, then in between my opening A tag and my closing A tag, I would need to write HTML images hyphen W3 schools. Just like that. The text in between my opening anchor tag and closing anchor tag is what a user will see and potentially be able to click on. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I reload my page and it's there. I see the text, but I can't click on it. It doesn't even look like a real hyperlink, right? That's because our anchor is missing the actual hyperlink reference, which is to say it's missing the connection to the website that we want this to lead to. So I'm going to find the link address for this HTML images hyperlink, and I'm going to add it to this anchor so we can activate it and use it as a clickable link. The way to do that is inside your opening anchor tag, we're going to add an Href attribute, just like our link tag. An Href attribute. The value will be different, obviously, but just like our link tag, we are using an Href attribute in our anchor tags to make these links actually work. And the value for that href is going to be the web page, which I want the link to send a user to. That's it. That's it. If I save that, reload my page, now it's clearly a link. It's clearly a hyperlink. And if I click on it, it takes me to the HTML images page on W3 Schools. Okay. Now, one thing I want to show you before we close out is if I remove the text contained inside the anchor, if there is nothing in between my opening and closing anchor tags, there is nothing for a user to see and nothing for a user to click on. So your anchors must contain some kind of content in order to be clickable, in order for a user to be able to interact with them. Your anchors must contain some kind of content. In addition, your anchors must contain an href attribute in order to behave like a link. Your anchors must contain an href attribute, this green href here. Let's say that you're building out a site and you're placing some links, but you're not sure yet where you want them to direct a user to. You don't know where they're going to go yet, but you still want to place a link element, an anchor element, pardon me. You still want to place links and anchor elements all over your page. Well, what do if you don't know yet what to put inside your href attribute? You can just leave it blank. You can just leave your href empty, just containing nothing but an empty pair of quotes, and the element will still function as a clickable hyperlink. Even though it's not going to go anywhere, I click on it, it doesn't take me anywhere, but it still looks and functions like a clickable hyperlink. So if you're throwing a page together and you want to see what your page is going to look like, even though you don't know where your anchors are going to direct to yet, this is a working solution. Just leave it empty. Empty pair of quotes. Okay, now when I say anchors need to contain something, most of the time they do contain text. Most of the time they do contain text. But let me jump back to this W3 Schools page. When I click on this button here, it also takes me to a new page. If it takes me to a new page, it is 100% an anchor element. An anchor element is involved. But what do you think is contained inside of this anchor element? Well, if I had to guess, without inspecting, although inspecting is always a good idea, I would say it probably contains a button element which says, "Try it yourself." There's no reason why an anchor cannot contain a whole button element. There's no reason why an anchor cannot contain a whole button element. By the same token, let's have a page that goes to codifyacademy.com. Now, by the same token, I'm going to take that Codify Academy link, paste it in the href attribute of this third anchor, close out my opening anchor tag, and inside this one, here, let me break it to a new line just so it's easier to see. Inside of this one, I'm going to put an image element. So now we have an image element, a whole image element contained inside an anchor element. Reload my page, and it's really big. I'm going to make my image more manageable for just a moment. Whoop. Now when I reload, look at that. Okay, our image fits on our page. Okay, it's a much more manageable size. But if I click on it, you see how my arrow has turned into a cursor? If I click on it, it takes me to Codify Academy. So we can place images inside of our anchors. We can place images, we can place buttons, we can place raw text. We could place H1s if we wanted big bold text to be clickable, to be a clickable hyperlink. You can place any kind of element, any kind of content inside of an anchor. Heck, if I really wanted to, I could put a div which contains a UL, which contains several LIs with some text, all inside, a single anchor element. All inside a single anchor element. So now if I go back to my page, this entire div, this whole area of my page down here, this whole div, which contains the UL, which contains some text, is now a clickable hyperlink. I can put anything inside of an anchor element. All right, last thing. It's very, very common for anchor elements to be used in navbar links. Navbar links, like up here where we have a menu button, a home button, an HTML link, a CSS link, and a more link. This is a navbar, an example of a navbar, and I would expect that each one of these buttons, for lack of a better word, each one of these clickable segments of the navbar is an anchor element. You're going to learn pretty soon, if you haven't already, that the way in which we create navbars is by using unordered lists with list items inside of them. Unordered lists with list items inside of them. So this might be the setup for a navbar. But where do I insert that anchor element that makes my nav elements, nav items, clickable? Where do I put my anchor tags? And the answer is each list item here represents one segment of your navbar. But we want the list items to remain the children of the unordered list. So what we can do is simply insert our anchor elements inside of our list items like so. Okay? This is very, very common. You will probably see this very, very soon if you have not already, and you will see it very, very often. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 tags all on the same line in the code. And honestly, we might even see something like this. It starts getting very visually complicated, very busy. If that happens, if you find that you encounter a line like this and you're not sure how to read it, don't be afraid to just break it up. And that tends to make it a lot easier to see and understand what's going on. We have a list item, which contains an anchor, which contains an H1. So what we're going to see is a clickable H1, clickable heading 1, inside of a list item, inside of an unordered list. You have to try your best to just break down these examples of what's called inline code one step at a time. Okay? But if there's one takeaway you walk away from this with, it's that anything can go inside of an anchor element and suddenly become a clickable link. And every anchor element must have an Href attribute, even if it's empty. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.